Suspiria is the 1977 horror classic. Welcome to the second week in our Halloween reviews, and this week we're doing Suspiria. I've never seen it before. You have seen it before, but it's been a couple of years, right?
Yeah, it's been a while. So, I mean, there were some things that were, familiar, but there were also things that I forgot. So it kind of felt a little bit fresh, just rewatching again.
Yeah, so one of the first things that jumps out at this movie is the style, is the colors and the direction style of this movie. So let's talk a little bit about why this movie has gained such a following, and I think it's because of how well-crafted this movie is.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the style's there, like, not only with the cinematography, but with the score. This is one of the last movies that was shot in Technicolor that gives, like, that real saturated color look, kind of like, like think Wizard of Oz and, like, the glossiness of that. So this was one of the last movies shot in Technicolor, and it definitely shows. And this movie at times is like distractingly beautiful, like kind of not takes me out of the horror or the scary moments, but like very rarely have I ever watched a horror movie and like I'm being scared, but I'm like, man, that's so beautifully shot. But with this one, it definitely happens.
I agree. Yeah, I think that this movie is gorgeous to look at. You're right. There's a lot of contrasting colors. He somehow can frame the shot to have a lot of colors going on at once, but they're very stark and they're very against each other, which also lends the tone to this movie. Right off the bat, there's a very eerie, unsettling tone to this, especially when we meet our character. And she's an American girl. She's arriving to Germany to go to this dance academy that's very prestigious, and you can tell she's a fish out of water and just not getting any help from anybody in this foreign land.
Yeah, I mean, not only fish out of water within the foreign land, but like within this school, she knows that she can tell this place isn't everything it appears to be. That something's going on, in the shadows, and she's getting a sense of that. And like, she really has no lifeline or support. She does befriend someone, and they do start to discover these things together.
Yeah.
But, in the end, she's very alone and isolated in this. And I think the isolation plays into the well-crafted scares of this movie.
Yeah, so let's talk about the horror of this movie. Yeah. I was pleasantly surprised with how well-crafted these scenes were when it comes to suspense leading up to some of the more gory and shocking moments. And also how gory and shocking this actually is for the time that it was made. Even to today's standards, this is some pretty intense stuff.
Yeah, and the thing I can appreciate about this movie is that the kills themselves are scary. I think that with like modern horror movies to like establish the villain, they just show somebody getting killed. And so then when our main characters get into peril, it's like, this thing kills, so it's scary because they could possibly die. But with this one, it's the kills themselves, the tension leading up to it and how they die is scary, and also once again just gorgeously shot. I mean, some of these moments where people's faces are getting smashed into glass or they're hanging from their neck, I'm just like, oh wow, that was just a beautiful little sequence there. Like I said, not enough to take me out of the horror, but it's just like weird how I was appreciating how beautifully shot these gory, intense moments were.
Yeah, they were incredibly well executed when it comes to the gore, when it comes to the suspense, which leads me to some of my complaints with it, where I think that the direction and the style of this sometimes outweighs some of the dialogue and material and even some of the plot points of this film. This movie is entirely dubbed.
Right.
And it is noticeable. And sometimes it can take you out of the experience. Luckily, it doesn't matter with the suspense scenes, but would you agree that some of the dialogue is a little rough?
Yeah. And I mean, I can understand. This was an Italian production. They had, multilingual cast and crew. So there would be actors sharing scenes with each other that don't speak the same language. So if shows on screen that they're not really communicating with each other, and the dub just kind of reinforces that. So, and not to mention that the dialogue in this movie is pretty clunky and expositional. Like, there are moments where people are just barfing information out to a character, like, oh, I know your aunt, she was a prestigious dancer here and a good friend of mine, la-di-da-di-da. And it's like, okay, you would have known that about that girl far before she arrived at this school.
You're in charge of this place? You should probably know this.
Exactly. So there are those moments where it's kind of barfing information, and I think that, that dialogue, the material they're given, the language barrier kind of leads to hammy acting at moments.
Yes.
Or at least it comes off as hammy, and once again, I think the dubbing just reinforces it.
I agree. You just sense a disconnect between these actors of what's going on, and once you find out why that is, it's excusable. Maybe not forgivable, but it's excusable. And by no means does it ruin the style or aesthetic or the horror of this movie, because it's throughout. Like, you feel this unsettling feeling throughout this entire movie while you're watching it. But yeah, just to touch on that exposition, I agree. There's one towards the beginning of the third act where it is she meets up with this guy. He tells her and you a bunch of stuff that you need to know just so you're not feeling too lost. And then she exits the scene. It just seems so shoehorned in there that I was like, it's the 70s. Maybe, they didn't really know how to get the point across. But right then and there, I was like, man, they could have done this differently. Or even just left it mysterious. I don't care. Like, they could have left it mysterious. But let's talk about the final act. I'm not going to spoil anything, but this final act was effective to me. And I thought it was really, really well done and just really cool. I thought it was a great scene.
Yeah, I think the end of this movie is very well executed and a lot of dread. It really takes you into the suspense moments. And I got to say, 41 years later, the special effects and makeup of this movie really hold up still.
Yeah.
Like, I was surprised that, because sometimes, when you have these old movies shot on film, they're using film to mask some of the flaws in the makeup.
Sure.
Like, if you watch Princess Bride in high def, like, the Miracle Max makeup looks a little makeup-y,
Right.
So I know that some movies can suffer from that, but I was surprised that this one didn't.
No, it didn't. And that scene really, like, it carries right along so intensely. It's so nonstop, and then the movie's over.
Right.
Just as quickly and as shockingly as it begins, because the opening scene in this movie also has probably, in my opinion, the most horrific scene in the movie in general. And
I think it's one of the best opening scenes of like any horror movie, like right up there with like Halloween.
Yeah, it's a really, really great scene. The ending's a really great scene, but yeah, this movie just sort of, the pacing suffers just a touch with that, where there's lots of intense moments and they're just barely punctuated throughout. And I could have used a little bit more I could have used less exposition scenes and more mystery, I suppose.
Yeah, I agree. I think like this movie's like bookended. The beginning and last 20 minutes are just like very intense and a lot goes on.
Yeah.
So I can totally understand how they could have stretched it out a little bit longer. This movie's only like 98 minutes, so I felt like maybe an extra 10 minutes there to give the movie some room to breathe would have helped.
Yeah, because we're used to so much in these days. We're used to kind of a fourth act, a wrap-up act,
right?
Something where the situation ends and then you get maybe 5 minutes of just some closure here. But this ends,
we're done,
and it's the first time I've ever seen a movie where right when it ends, it shows words to you. It's like, you have been watching Suspiria. And I'm like, I have been watching Suspiria. But that was so quick and jarringly ending that maybe it made it even more memorable. I don't know. Maybe that was the purpose.
Yeah, just to, break convention and, go against tradition.
Yeah.
Buffs. All right, Nate, so we went all the way back to 1977, watched the original Suspiria. I think there are impressive moments, but do you give this a recommendation, and where does it rank for you on the spooky scale, 0 to 5?
Well, I went into this movie almost completely blind. I knew nothing about it, and I was pleasantly surprised with the horror of this, the vibe, the feeling. This is a great movie to watch around Halloween. If you've never seen it, I do recommend it. So yeah, I would say see it. As for the spooky scale, it's way scarier than Army of Darkness, our last one, which was barely scary at all.
Right.
No, this one can be quite frightening, especially with some of the gorier scenes that are still shocking for today's standards. I'm going to go a 3.5 out of 5 on the spooky scale. I think this movie's pretty damn scary. What about you?
I'm right there with you. Suspiria is a good classic. Kind of one, like an lost or forgotten classic, especially the era that it came out in. I can see how it got lost in the shuffle. So I will definitely give Suspiria a see it. And as far as the spooky scale, this movie still holds up with the scares, even with the high def transfer, and the moments are there. It still works. They're beautifully crafted by Dario Argento. So I will give this a 4 out of 5 on the spooky scale. Buffs. All right, so that's it for our review of Suspiria. What did you guys think of the movie? Are you excited for the remake coming out? Go ahead, leave a comment down below.
And next week for our Halloween review, we're going to do a movie that I have seen and you haven't, and that is Behind the Mask, The Legend of Leslie Vernon. I'm very excited for you to see this movie and to just talk about this movie. It's a really interesting one.
Yeah, you told me the premise. I'm totally on board for this one.
For sure. So we'll bring you that review next week, but wherever you are, whoever you're with,
watch more movies.